Jamie, welcome. Great to talk to you.
Guy, always great to talk to you.
All right, here we go.
Yeah.
All right, look, what I'd like to do is read a bit of kind of snippet of your bio and then jump into your book. Sound
Sure.
good? Okay. All right, folks. So welcome to the live bookstore interview. Super excited to have Jamie Marich here, Dr. Jamie Marich. So as many of you, I'm sure know, Jamie speaks internationally on EMDR therapy, trauma, addiction, dissociation, expressive arts, yoga, and mindfulness. And she runs a private practice and online training network in her home base of Akron, Ohio. She's written numerous books, notably Trauma and the 12 Steps, an inclusive guide to recovery, also Dissociation Made Simple. And her new book, which we're going to be talking about today, is titled You Lied to Me About God. It's set to come out. Well, it's already out, correct?
Yep. October.
It's already out. Now, I want to just read a snippet of a review, of Kirkus review. Kirkus says, it's an intimate and important memoir of deconstructing and reconstructing faith after abuse. A spiritual memoir that does not shy away from abuse, queerness, or the multifaceted character of God. Jamie, welcome. Every time I talk to you, I'm like amazed at everything you're doing, the breadth of your doing. Anyway, great to see you.
Thank you. Great to be
right. So let's dive in here. Why this book?
This book is the why behind so much of my work. And a lot of my other books, like Dissociation Made Simple, Trauma and the 12 Steps, I'm very candid about the fact that I'm a person in long-term recovery, that my personal experience with trauma healing is what got me into this field. It's what drives me to do this work. And so even though I have disclosed that, in this book, you're going to get the deep dive into what made my brain adapt the way it did and why the struggles came about. So that's one reason, because I feel established enough in my career now where I can get even more personal in my writing. But the other reason why is, and I'm going to be candid here, I know some listeners may not like this, I have been very concerned about the impact of extreme Christian nationalism in the United States. I think it is something that a lot of us see in our practices, especially for clients who are queer. And because of the way I grew up, especially in nationalistic evangelicalism in the 80s, and then having another parent who was Catholic, and I had some time working for the Catholic Church, I saw the impact of high demand religion. I was impacted by high demand religion. And these are things that we as professionals must. And so I felt now is the time to get honest.
Help me with some terminology. High demand religion. What is that?
Yeah, high demand religion is a term that's been proposed kind of as an alternative to the word cult. Because cult, cult is an interesting word, right? Yeah, cult is an interesting word because you can go right now to the International Cultic Studies Association, look up 14 characteristics of a cult. And a lot of us who grew up in what we consider more mainstream churches definitely experience a lot of those qualities of a cult. Yet our experience would not be something that would end up on a Netflix documentary necessarily. And, language is funny because I always say in the trauma professions, the key to trauma informing anything is language. And so some people may say, well, my experience in religion was cultish, but I wouldn't say I was in a cult. And so I think it's just another term that may rest better with some people, that may better describe their experiences, that to say this church I went to, it wasn't officially a cult, yet they operated like one in a lot of ways, and they asked a lot of me. They exerted a lot of control over my life. The demands were high.
How did your relationship to religion, to God, change as you were a young kid?
Yeah, so my parents were both Roman Catholic when I got married. And so religion did not seem like a big deal in the first few years of my life, at least where I have conscious memory. Some of my earliest memories are going to Catholic church and my parents participating in the choir. But then where religion became the central focus of my life when I was about 5 years old. My father converted to a Pentecostal evangelical group that was already pretty swept up. And even if the group themselves wasn't as swept up, my dad definitely went into the Christian nationalism rhetoric pretty quickly in the late 80s. And part of the tone and tenor of the evangelical group he belonged to was a belief that Catholics weren't really Christians. Because I think a lot of people outside of Christianity think, oh, Catholics, Protestants, evangelicals, they're all the same. On one hand, it's all under the umbrella of Christianity and worship of Jesus, but there can be a lot of infighting about, you're not a real Christian, you're not a real Christian. So at the age of 5, I was already hearing things like, your mother's going to hell. Your grandparents aren't going to make it unless they convert to my way of Christianity. So I have vivid memories of that time. And my father, who had some issues that show up in other parts of my story, but the religion just seemed to bring it all out in a way that, I later learned met the definition of spiritual abuse.
So what does this look like as you're going through adolescence or even prepubescence? How is this impacting you?
Yeah, so a lot of kids who grew up evangelical in the 90s were exposed to this thing we call purity culture. It was a really big movement about you have to save yourself for marriage. And in fairness, a lot of Catholics would officially propose that as well, that the only valid sexual activity is in the state of marriage. But here it was a lot of demonizing us for even having normal sexual urges and desires in our body as teenagers. And a story that I tell in the memoir is the first boy I ever really loved in high school. Looking back on it now, the experimentation we engaged in, the love we shared for each other was completely appropriate for adolescent and relationships, and at knowing that what I know now as a professional. But one of the reasons I got so scared by it and so shut down by it was that, he's a predator. He's doing this, he's doing that. And knowing him, because I know him in adulthood now, farthest thing from a predator, like farthest from a predator. But it's just a lot of messaging that your body is bad, your body cannot be trusted, your body will lead you astray. So I got that really first in the evangelical church with that intensity, but I got it on the Catholic side as well, because I went to Catholic school. And I remember in the 8th grade, there was a lot of this messaging that even light or heavy petting should be avoided because it'll put you in the occasion of sin. And I write in the memoir, what are we, dogs, if we're using that kind of language? And there wasn't, comprehensive sex education at all. It was very much kind of sex according to certain narrow interpretations of the Bible. So that's a developmental impact, just as a for example.
What does it take? What did it take to get to the point where you're like, I need to write this book?
I know I've been needing to write it for about 10 years, honestly, because there are a lot of memoirs on the market about escaping high demand Christianity, getting out of high demand Christianity. So in a way, I don't think my story is that unique, except that I got it on both sides of, or two different sides of the Christian debate. I got it from Catholicism. I got it from the evangelical side. And even though the two churches can't stand each other in general and debate each other about the validity of their Christianity, they still hate a lot of the same things in common. Or like sexual exploration that's healthy, definitely queerness. So as a kid, my first any kind of experimental activity was with girls. And that was definitely in the category of sin and shun-worthy behavior. Neglecting the rights of women over anything else. I don't know how detailed you want to get in the interview, but there were just a lot of common things that both churches hated. So I wanted to write the book to share my perspective on, and then what it was like trying to navigate two religions at the same time that looked similar on the surface, but really had a lot of differences. And I was pitted in this position as somebody who had to referee my parents' battles. So there's a lot in there that I think can be helpful for trauma therapists who want to know more about spiritual abuse and religious trauma.
In terms of your identity, it feels like from the outside, you're trying to navigate this landmine. What did this do? What did that do to your identity?
It has definitely impacted the way I have been able to function, or I should say, struggle with functioning in any kind of romantic relationship after leaving my parents' house, because I grew up in this container of a lot of mixed messaging. I grew up, and this is a message that both churches did have in common, though, with this idea that I have to be married and have children and have a family in order to be seen as valid by both the church and society. And so even with a lot of the rhetoric that came up during the election about childless cat ladies and needing to birth your own biological children, none of that surprised me, because that's a lot of messaging I got both implicitly and explicitly in both churches. So I have definitely struggled in relationships. I have been married and divorced twice. And I unpack some of the reasons why in the memoir, and how some of the lack of any kind of healthy modeling for how someone like me could be in a relationship growing up is a huge reason. And what I mean by somebody like me is somebody who is very feminist at her soul, someone who is queer, someone who has a polyamorous heart, and somebody, and you know this about me, Guy, we don't like to stay in boxes very well. We're even professionally seeing ourselves as somebody trained by rules and regulations, not to say like ethics aren't important and boundaries
Sure.
are important, but we don't like to be put in the box. And for us, the church was the first box.
One of the things you stated earlier was this struggle or process of sharing more about yourself professionally. Talk to us about that struggle, because I find that not only fascinating but really inspiring for myself.
Well, I mean, a lot of us as professionals are taught in graduate school to either keep the blank slate or don't talk about yourself much. And to be clear, yes, there are good ethics and boundaries for us to adhere to around that. Like when you're with the client, you never want to make it all about you. And I definitely follow guidelines about self-disclosure, should have a good reason, etc. But I think where I get really concerned is in our professional circles, at conferences, in professional organizations. I've just been around so many folks where it's this thing like we just zip it up. And I think a lot of our gut that most of us get into this field because we've had our own experience with trauma. And there's a piece of literature suggesting that up to 48% of active psychologists have an active mental health diagnosis. 80% has problems with mental health symptoms. And I think those numbers probably lowball, as they often are in research. So I have just felt, I've always felt like a bit of a misfit in the clinical professions, even in professional organizations I belong to that I really like, because I have this sense that we can hide behind technique and research and numbers and academic politeness and not really get to what's important, which is being vulnerable with each other, because it's often not safe in professional circles to be vulnerable with each other.
Yeah. It's definitely one of the things that I've discovered during the interviews I've been doing on the podcast. Without a doubt, I think those numbers are definitely low. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're human beings, right? We all have our issues and struggles, and to talk about that, to share that in a profession or in a forum where you're the one who's looked upon to have answers, gets very tricky. Gets very tricky. Just want to remind everyone I'm speaking with Dr. Jamie Marich. The book is You Lied to Me About God. So who is this book for?
This is probably the most widest audience book I've written, in that it can be just picked up as a memoir for people who like memoir. So I think anybody who likes a good memoir could pick it up. I think it'd be most appealing to people who've had a high demand religion or are trying to sort out spiritual abuse, religious trauma. Yet for my professionals from the field in which I come, I think it's for you too, especially if you're wanting to learn more about spiritual abuse, religious trauma, cults. Because I think when we did the main podcast interview, something I said was when I first got into this field, 2003, 2004, this was hardly being talked about. Spiritual abuse, religious trauma. There was some good cult literature. That was the first thing I ever found. And I remember 20 up to about 10 years ago, it felt like I was the only one really talking about this in some of the trainings I did on trauma. So I think there's been a burgeoning of interest. One learned from Dr. Yanya Lalich, who's a cult specialist who I've now done some work with, is the pandemic really escalated a lot of online cults and new age spiritual groups, and therapists are working with people who've been impacted by those. And I just think there's a need and a hunger for more training in this area, and there's training to be had for sure. Yet I think connecting with the personal story, perhaps of somebody who you respect as a trauma teacher, might be a way that you continue or further your gathering of information about the impact of spiritual abuse and religious trauma on people.
Were there ways in which the writing of this and exploration of your experience in this has helped you professionally or personally?
It was, I don't even know. Here I am, the writer, and I don't have words to put into focus just how therapeutic it was for me, not only to write this, I then did the audiobook recording of it myself. And so to read the words aloud, in some cases, perform the words aloud, really was a form of exposure therapy for me. As I wrote the book, I also engaged in a lot of expressive arts practices as I was writing. I wrote some songs that go along with the book, and those are out now on wherever you stream music. You can also search You Lied to Me About God. It was just a very needed thing. And I shared this, I think, in the introduction, that this was one of the easiest things I had to write and also one of the hardest. I mean, what made it easy was this has just been needing to come out of me in this way. Hard was doing some of the work around, this is going to make a lot of people mad, both people I know and people who in the professions look at me and think either, oh, I share too much, or she's too liberal, she's too this, she's too that. So,
well, how do you deal with that?
Yeah.
I mean, you putting yourself out there, which again, to me, I find so inspiring. Do you have to deal with that? Or is that just who you are? And is this something you have to contend with?
Yeah, I mean, most things that have been said about me by other professionals have gotten to me through other channels. And I've had a couple people say things to me directly that, oh, you share too much, or it's not enough to just share your own story. We have to be doing more research, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I've dealt with some of that, but I also have made a decision that if anybody is going to chide me about being too, and I'm just talking in the professions here, I really think it says more about them than about me. And it's how I felt when my ex-husband, which I write about in the book, tried to use my mental health struggles against me. And when I talked about it with my own brilliant trauma therapist, she said, this says more about him that somebody would try to, or not the struggles and the consequences, but just being out and candid about it. So I take a lot of that with a grain of salt. I mean, I think though with this, what made this even harder is my immediate family is all still very religious, all still very conservative. I have members of my extended family who are definitely not, especially my cousins to whom I dedicate the book, and they have been remarkably supportive through this process. And I have a lot of people in my family of choice, as I talk about in the book. It's a very important construct to queer folks who have been very supportive. But yeah, there's a lot of people who don't like when you tell the truth, especially publicly. And so I've had to deal with a little bit of fallout there, but I also knew it had to be done.
In the same way that, when you look at the therapeutic relationship, when you have a therapist who is able to be present and authentic, and, we understand how that can impact a client, especially someone who's experienced trauma. My feeling is that the way you are and the way you present yourself and who you are and your openness really allows the profession to, I think, take another step towards openness and authenticity. I think it's so neat. I think you, and I said this to you before, I see you as kind of a guiding light for a lot of people in the profession to stand up and understand the power of being who we are. That's not easy to do.
Yeah.
So I just want to applaud you and really, and I'm not saying that just to blow smoke, but I really think it's very powerful how you're moving through your life and your world. I think we need to look at you and say, yes, I can share authentically and yes, ethically with boundaries, of course, but we need that. We need that.
And I think especially now we need that.
Yeah.
Something I saw this float around, but it really struck me years ago that when you are a person who's queer, who's trans, who's LGBT, your very existence publicly is an act of advocacy, is an act of resistance. And I do not take it lightly how hard it can be to come out, especially because of issues of safety. Physical safety, emotional safety in the professions. A lot of people have a fear about coming out about either their own sexuality or their own mental health diagnosis because they don't want their livelihood to be impacted. So I really want to assure you come out and you be yourself in your own time, because you'll read in the memoir. It was a years-long process for me to be comfortably sitting here with you as another professional. Doing this, yet your existence is advocacy right now and will continue to be. And if what I have been able to do has helped one other person be a little more okay with who they are and speaking out about it, then I know I have been meant to do this.
As we kind of wind down here, what currently is your relationship to religion, to God?
Yeah, I love this question because I actually have no issue at all with God. I think I have a very strong relationship personally with the God of my understanding. I have a God who uses all pronouns, who shows up in all ways, and even the Christian mythology, so to speak, the Christian story, the person of the Christ and what he represents, I'm cool with him. I mean, I think my read on Christianity is a little more progressive, certainly a lot more progressive than the way that I was raised. And I also draw from the wisdom and inspiration of other faith traditions. I believe all spiritual paths meet in the middle. So I personally think one of the reasons I was so wounded by religion and the church is that everything in me is wired for spiritual connection and spiritual practice and connecting with the divine in all its forms. And so to be told that the way I naturally want to do it is wrong and bad and sinful, I think was a big part of the damage. So I'm not saying you have to get cool with God to heal from this. Everybody's healing path looks different. Yet I truly say from the depths of my soul that God is not the problem for me. It's what's done in God's name that has been the problem for me.
The book again is You Lied to Me About God, a memoir. Jamie, what's the best way for people to learn more about you and reach out and get in contact with you?
Yeah, myname.com if you're looking online. That link, jamiemarich.com, that links you to the books. My training company is Institute for Creative Mindfulness.com. That's where I do EMDR therapy trainings at. I also have a free resources site at redefinetherapy.com that people can access anytime. The book's available wherever books are sold, and you could find me on any of the socials. Just search.
Awesome. Jamie, love talking to you. Every time I do, I'm like, get a jolt of energy and inspiration. You're welcome back. We'll be in touch.
Thank you, Guy. Bye.